300 million children a year are victims of online sexual exploitation. You said that Australia is one of the highest consumers of child abuse material, or CSAM, in the world. And only 2% of cases that are reported, we get a conviction out of that.
And 3/4 of them had seen a beheading. And it hadn't been because they shared it. It was because it came up in their post feed. And I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter and a 5-year-old grandson. And I just thought that I assumed that they would have the same childhood I did, which is, you hear about those things, but they don't come up in your everyday living. And so I thought, this is much more of a mission than it is a dare.
Please stop sharing photos with children online. There is no benefit to them.
It's kind of like saying you have to go through the red light district to get to a preschool.
Technology is not the full villain, but it's being weaponized against children, which is completely different.
Today, I've got two people at the table who on the surface couldn't be more different, but they've both independently arrived at the same conclusion about one of the biggest problems in cybersecurity right now. How do we protect kids online without destroying privacy for the rest of us? One of them is an inventor who spent 30 years building technology, and the other is a survivor who's dedicated her life to making sure what has happened to her doesn't happen to anyone else's children. So I want to start by just doing a round table. Adriana, for anyone who didn't catch any of our previous episodes on the show, who are you and what drives this work?
So I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, as you mentioned, but I am as well the founder of the Innocent Souls Project, which is an initiative based on cybersecurity, e-safety, and the physical safety of children that I call a triangular protection. And our purpose is to protect children both online and offline. And my work has been based on that, finding creative ways to improve child protection in a digital era where everything is evolving far too rapid, and we just want to catch up and make sure that obviously we can protect children ultimately.
Yeah. Ric, you've invented literally everything from anti-piracy technology to shark deterrence to passwordless authentication. You've spent 3 decades in a lab doing this. What made you look at all the experience that you've got and say, the next problem I need to solve is keeping kids safe online?
Well, actually, a mutual friend of the e-safety commissioner was having a meeting with me, and she said, that she mentioned me to the safety commissioner, and I know a guy that should be able to solve this problem, and it was really a dare. I thought, I'll have a go at it. You know, I started looking at the technologies, but as soon as I did any background research, I started seeing some of the statistics, and one of them was a Guardian article that talked about a survey of a lot of kids in a room, and 3/4 of them had seen a beheading. And it hadn't been because they shared it. It was because it came up in their post feed. And I've got a 3-year-old granddaughter and a 5-year-old grandson. And I just thought that I assumed that they would have the same childhood I did, which is, you hear about those things, but they don't come up in your everyday living. And so I thought, this is much more of a mission than it is a dare. And technologically, it wasn't that hard to solve, but it became a completely different thing when it became such an obviously big problem.
Yeah. So here's what I find fascinating. You two have arrived at the same problem from completely opposite directions: technology, experience, and what's happened in your lives. Adriana, you've obviously lived the worst of what happens when the system fails. Ric, you've spent your career building the systems. But before I get into further questions, I want to know, do you think technology is ultimately the hero or the villain in this story?
I have arrived to the conclusion that technology is not the full villain, but it's being weaponized against children, which is completely different, right? It's like anything in life, right? In the wrong hands, it can be used for good. In the wrong hands, it can harm people. The same with a car. It's pretty much the same. So to demonize technology as a whole, I think is a very bad conclusion, because we have evolved with it, and it definitely has helped the way that we live now. And ultimately, I think that you can come back to the same point where technology can actually be part of the solution. We can't change the way that we live now. Like, we can't return to 30, 40 years ago where, we didn't have this incredible amount of tech around and things that have facilitated the way that we live. That's not possible. But I think we need to keep evolving as these actually evolves. I understand that technology obviously has evolved quite rapidly, and we are behind in terms of how do we protect children or the most vulnerable in general. But I'm going back to what I said. I believe the solution as well is around technology.
Well, I never think technology is the problem. The problem is the structure of companies. It's shareholder interest. And shareholders, at some stage, they just say, hey, I invested, I need a return. And so that's what's driving everything. And in the end, there isn't the moral responsibility that happens when you're the dad in a family, or you're the person talking to somebody across a counter. There isn't that, individual accountability. Well, technology's a tool, and you can use tools to bash someone over the head or to build to build a house. So I never see technology as the problem, but I'm so comfortable with technology that I can see easily how to solve these problems. And the problem is that also there's vested interests. Like, most of the people that are trying to solve this problem are just trying to use existing stuff that they've always done, that's quite expensive, and then trying to apply it to this situation, which is a pretty new situation. And you've got to rethink the way you're doing it to to consider all the issues that are involved, like privacy, like the fact that you don't want 12 Australians jumping through hoops to protect the one Australian. But on the other side, the one Australian we're protecting is, the gem of our society. So the kids, they need to be protected beyond anybody else. They're innocent, mostly. Some of them are troublemakers. I got a couple in my family.
I was one of them, troublemaker. I think, just to add on to what Ric said, I think ultimately, even I see it from a perspective of the research I've been studying a lot for the last year, how predators really act. And I've noticed that this is a human problem. It's a human behavior problem behind it. It's a lack of, integrity. It's a lack of morals. It's a lack of care for others, and technology and all these companies out there, they are not accountable, they are not responsible, they're not liable. And so it just opens a box of absolute terror and problems. And that's where we are at right now, where we're trying to reverse the damage that has been done for so many years. But definitely it's a human issue more than it's a technological issue.
Yeah. It's interesting what Adriana just brought up, because you actually want the internet to be open and free, and you want people to have privacy, but it's used as an excuse to hide bad behavior. Like social media in general allows people from the I call them the cheap seats, to behave badly. They wouldn't talk to someone else the way they talk in social media if you had met someone in the street. And if you did, the whole community would go, hey, tone it down, mate. Turn the language down. There's people around here who can't tolerate that kind of behavior. And it's interesting that what you do in person is naturally constrained by natural community, behavior expectations, but they just go out the window online. And that becomes an excuse for all kinds of things that go beyond normal behavior, deviant behavior. So, when Adriana started talking about there's such a high percentage of guys particularly who have terrible tendencies, I wonder why that happened. And because I think a lot of that is happening just because of the freedom that you have online, that you wouldn't have in person, and so I'm totally shocked by that and think that everybody should get off their backsides and really get behind trying to make sure that technology is used to corner these guys. It's not that hard, but when you've got a wall of self-interest saying, no, we want kids to be using social media as soon as possible, and we want all of our customers to do as much activity online as possible so they get exposed to the maximum amount of advertising, blah, blah, blah. At some point, someone's got to say no. But I also thought it was interesting. I was looking back at my own childhood, and like at school, at high school, there was always a teacher in the playground. You could see where they were. There was always kids that were pulling, stuff from magazines out and sharing it, but it wasn't something that everybody in the whole school could see, and and people always do. Kids will always try to do things. There's always shenanigans going on, but that supervision by an adult that is actually screened and is actually reliable and is actually trustworthy, that doesn't appear online. So, so my job with SafeGen, which is the technology that I'm working on to try and solve this problem, is about constricting kids from adult sites and from social media unless they're over 16, sorry. But, social media and all of these other tools, they do have a place if they're supervised, and if the social media companies don't provide the ability to have that supervision, oh, it's too expensive. Oh, we can't pay for that. Oh, we can't have staff doing that. It's the parents' responsibility. Well, have a website, have an area where parents are taking shifts in being supervisors for a bunch of kids, but don't just let them go off and do whatever they want. You don't do it in real life, and there's no excuse for it online. So anyway, that's, one of the things that I'm throwing into the pot, but it's a little bit further down the track, because the first thing is to allow adults to get onto do their adult things, buy tobacco, alcohol, adult websites, stuff like that. We can't tell everybody on the planet what our moral expectations are, but as parents, we should be able to do that. And as a community trying to protect kids, it's built into the law. It's just the law delegates it to parents, and parents are expected to kind of do the right thing by the kids, and generally they do. There's few rare exceptions, but I really can't even imagine it. A parent going, "Oh yeah, it's all right for you to go smoking. It's all right for you to go and get drunk. It's all right." I just can't imagine it. Maybe there's parents that have done that, but I just can't see it.
I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, you've got growing up where you've either had the environment where you're under supervision, where you've said, for example, you might be at a family event, you've got a beer in your hand, and you might say to your kid, "Here, have some," right? I mean, not deliberately, but what I mean is have a taste.
Yeah.
Or they say in France, kids grow up where they have at the dinner table watered down wine, for example. It's supervised, it's controlled. It's not like they're saying, "Here's the bottle, go for gold," until you get smashed. That old thing when we were kids where you get caught smoking. I don't know if you remember, Rick, but the punishment was you've got to smoke as many cigarettes as possible till you're sick and you never want to smoke again theory, right? So there was that supervision there and things were happening. But getting back to something you both said, I do agree when it comes to the online activities and everything that happens and what's presented to this current generation. I think the best show available you can watch is The Social Dilemma. And that's all about, as you said, the algorithms are being trained to optimize as much advertising and information about anyone. They don't care whether the algorithm doesn't pick whether it's a child or it's an adult. It's just been trained to do this. And as a kid, you get iPads from the age of 3 these days. You see it like you go out in the park, parents have got prams, and instead of letting the kid freely express themselves out, just so the kid can be quiet, they put an iPad in front of them, and the kid's doing this and playing and getting hypnotized to this technology. And then they get to a certain age. And as a parent, if you don't have the understanding of teaching your child what's right and wrong in technological terms, then it's kind of like giving the keys to a Ferrari and saying, go for a drive, see how you go. Hope you don't crash the car. And, this is the world we live in today.
Yeah. It is an interesting thing that came up when the government first started getting reaction from kids about it. A lot of the discussion was around about the first 3 to 4 days of, what they did and how hard it was, but how the vacuum of social media is what really got them going, because it takes time to start fiddling with the piano. It takes time to set up the cricket, in the backyard cricket, and it takes time to get your drawing materials out and start to draw. And it takes time and boredom and, just sheer the distress of having a vacuum that got them into that situation. So, when I was a kid and going into holidays, you have a few things in your head that you want to do desperately, but then there's this big gap, and that's where you start to invent all these interesting things, and you don't know what hobbies you're interested in until you've got a vacuum. I got into dirt bikes, fiddling around trying to find a bike, convinced Dad to let me do it, trying not to fall off the thing, having it crash and fixing it, and all that kind of stuff, which all happened when I was between 10 and 12 years old. Kids, that vacuum of all of that determination that happens from not having anything to do, only comes if you have that. But, social media is really great at, just filling up gaps in time and showing you interesting things and fluff. But the thing is, you stop after, 3/4 of an hour and you realize, I've lost my ability to draw. Like all you need to do is, use your finger on the screen, and you never, you lose your dexterity, you lose your imagination and all of those things. It's really, I thought it was really interesting watching the kids do that. And it's hard on parents too, because parents don't like seeing their kids go through the agony. Oh, I'm bored. Can you buy me something? Take me somewhere. Fill up that blank. And you say, no, go in the backyard. That was my mother's thing, was go out and play and don't bother me. And that means that we had to work out how to get our skateboards working. We had to build a track in the backyard on the patio. It's all that stuff that happens because kids are forced to deal with their boredom.
I think the way I've seen it is, and the way I explain it to some parents is that ultimately any social media users are not the customers, right? They're not the customers. The reality is that we're the product. We are the ones who give our time, and they make money out of that time. And the same happens with children. So anything that is in there has to be created in a way that, the user can actually not have the ability to unhook from what they're watching. And that's exactly what Ric was saying at the beginning, right? It's profit over, the morals of knowing how harmful this is going to be ultimately to our society. And the other problem right now is that we have a whole generation that grew up with technology. So it's part of our lives. And we think that it's so normal, quote unquote, so normal to have, iPads and iPhones and laptops, and it has been embedded in who we are. And so it just kind of formed a little bit of our identity. And so you have very young parents that never thought this was a problem, because we grew up in that era of MySpace and the start of Facebook. But I think the problem has grown so much that you have so many layers. You have to tackle the cultural issue of not understanding really well how this works. You have to tackle the problem of technology, how it's being really utilized, and that safety by design is not even a conversation they're having. But yeah, I think our generation truly is going through a crisis. And it goes back to that documentary mentioned, Bora, the social media dilemma. And it was exposed there a couple of years ago. We kind of knew about it, but now we are actually seeing firsthand the tangible results of it. How many children are committing suicide, how many children are being abused, the amount of sextortion that is going on online. It's just absolutely unacceptable. And so I think from this point of where I stand is that this is enough. Enough is enough, and that we need to try to do multiple things, because this is a systematic problem. This is not a problem that just one solution will actually resolve the whole thing. That includes obviously any government ideas or regulations, regulatory, standpoints that start something like the social media ban is part of it. But I think the problem is definitely extremely complex.
Look, I want to shift gears here now, and I want to bring up a topic we spoke about in our last recording, Adriana. You told me that 300 million children a year are victims of online sexual exploitation. You said that Australia is one of the highest consumers of child abuse material, or CSAM, in the world. And only 2% of cases that are reported, we get a conviction out of that. Now, I've looked at that number again and again, and it's genuinely very hard to process. It doesn't make sense in my head. So what do people still fundamentally not understand about how bad this is?
I think it's a little bit of a taboo topic still. That's why I've been trying to be, I guess, strong enough to say, I'm a survivor. I was a victim and I'm a survivor, because this is a far too common issue. And I think what people do not get is that. It's pretty much that. There is ability to say what happened, but as well, victim survivors have the right to remain silent. And there are a lot of people that have remained silent. So that being said, I believe in Australia, 1 in 7 victims will speak up in their lifetime. The rest won't. And that's just very telling. The other thing is that I believe that our society has not placed enough importance to this. And I have mentioned this before. If the numbers are that high, if we know that, and in fact, we know as well that the children that are involved in criminal activity, 50% of them have been abused. If we know that, why are we not really trying to resolve the core issue that is producing so many problems in our society? So I believe that what people do not get is that we need to speak more about this issue. But as you said, Bora, it's so hard to believe. The numbers are too high. And so many people shut down this conversation, think, oh, you know what, I would rather have a conversation about something else than the amount of child sexual abuse that is ongoing in our country. And Australia is in a unfortunately, a very, very bad place. And I hope that from these conversations, we can bring light into the problem, because this is a problem that the more we speak about it, the easier we're going to get more solutions. And that's why I always say, I have said before, it's not that I feel comfortable about sharing my own experience, but I don't do it out of being comfortable. I am uncomfortable and I'm okay with that, but I do it because I know it's extremely valuable for survivors to share that this is happening and has happened.
Now, we've also talked about something that I think terrifies a lot of us, is that we're seeing Sharenting, I think is a term that we all use, where parents are taking lots of photos of their kid every single day, and that how now AI coming into play, the next technology past beyond social media now, that can take an innocent photo of a child, or anyone for that matter, and turn it into abuse material. Now, that's not hypothetical. That's literally what's happening. Okay. And so I guess, can you explain to someone listening right now, a parent who maybe have just posted a photo of their kid this morning at school, right? What actually happens to that image? And then, Ric, I'd love your take on this too, because I want to know if is there a technological answer, or is the genie out of the bottle on this one?
I said to parents this, and I'm very strong about this, sharing now is oversharing. Please stop sharing photos with children online. There is no benefit to them. The one thing that makes me very upset about this topic is that children never consent to that the repercussions are far higher and far worse than what we see and understand, because we're not actually constantly, I guess, normal people are there constantly looking into how many files of child sexual abuse materials are created. But the percentage is horrific. 27,000% increase in the last year worldwide. I mean, that number is like even so hard to comprehend and fathom. Like, I mean, that should tell every single parent, just stop doing it, right? And I think there are so many initiatives out there that have been trying to take off some of this material. But having said that, as soon as a file is shared in the dark web, there is no guarantee. I mean, it's more likely that file will exist and be shared upon thousands of times. So this is why it's so important, right? And we spoke about the metadata, the information is behind those photos, the information that, bad actors can obtain and ultimately use to try to locate and harm a child. And we have seen case after case where these actors have been acting more sophisticatedly, and basically they've been harnessing and been proactively looking into this information in data, in the metadata, to locate children. We have seen it in Perth recently, and the only message I can say to parents is just please stop doing that.
Yeah.
Ric, what's your point on this one?
Well,
and the technology?
We're going into an area which is a real pointy-edged, tip of the spear from the problem that I've been solving, which is how to block kids out of adult areas. And you're getting into an area which is, from my perspective, it's pretty easy to limit who gets access to your family photographs and stuff. Like my wife shares my granddaughter's photographs. It's usually via iMessage. She's not big on social media. If she was, it's fairly easy on social media to kind of constrain to immediate family. Although it's not, for an average person, it's not real obvious how to do that. And that's part of the problem with them, because they like people to share. That's the engineering problem with it. But, like I was just thinking about Adriana's facts and figures there, that, my inner family is about at least 30 to 40 people. So according to her statistics, there's going to be someone who's going to abuse that material, may not want to abuse the kids, but they'll want to abuse the material. So that's a real concern. Like, you can technically, from just running basic AI services, know when there's an underage child in a photograph, and recommend that you not share that, or if you do, you get a warning. A newborn child, for a mother or a father of a newborn child, sharing that moment is a special thing. But like, the fact that the way a dirty mind takes that and uses it, it's kind of really a shame. And it's really hard to imagine. I feel uncomfortable just even trying to imagine, how those kind of things, get used. I've had enough situations in my near family to know that there's things happening that I'm finding really hard to imagine they actually have happened. And that's kind of, and I don't know if it was just covered over in the past or it's become worse because of our age and because of technology, but it's definitely not imaginary, and it seems to be becoming more and easier because of it. And unfortunately, it's either regulation or a lot of effort by the parents, to do that.
Mm.
I also kind of think it's really, really hard to kind of say to everybody, don't do this, don't share a photograph, because you've got that moment where you want to share something really special. I've seen all my nieces and nephews, their first few moments, their first few hours, it's pretty it's a pretty special thing, to witness. And it's more special for them to share than it is for me as an uncle to have seen them or a granddad to have seen them. But still, it'd be terrible if we had to, stop that from happening.
Yeah,
Polaroid could
I agree.
Polaroid could make a living out of it.
Yeah,
I agree.
The old say Fuji.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm struggling with, and I've heard both of you say this, I've had Susan McLean say this as well, that a parent should be the first line of protectors. But I guess a lot of the parents, and I've asked these questions and I've seen this online a lot as well, say that we're completely overwhelmed. They have they don't know, well, most people don't know what metadata is for that matter, right? And they don't know what a hash is, or they don't want their, they do want their kids to be safe. But I guess, is it fair to say that that's an excuse, or is ignorance in 2026 no longer acceptable? And, I want both your honest opinions on that.
Ric.
Go with me. No, look, it is an excuse, not an excuse it's so complicated that it's either, parents say, no, I can't, I'm a Polaroid dad, or whatever. Or you use platforms that are really quite secure, like iMessage. If you share with a family member and a family member does something like that, it's pretty impossible to stop. But social media is engineered to do the sharing. So, so when you tag your account as being private or this photograph as being private, it should only go to the one person that you've invited and not be able to be on-shared. There's some basic things that the guys and girls that are working on this, should be able to do, and it's really easy for them to do, right? But in the meantime, if you're not technically gifted, then treat it like any advanced technology. Stay away from it. If you're not a mechanic, then don't go tinkering around with an engine. And unfortunately, if it's beyond your skills, then palming it off on somebody else and saying, it's not my fault, is besides the fact it's your kid that's getting hurt. So you just got to kind of like get real about that. But, it's not like it's impossible. I really sympathize with a lot of parents. In fact, a friend of mine's a really great IT specialist. He runs corporate IT. And when I brought this up, he's been using screen time controls and everything with he's got 3 teenage girls, right? So he's in the middle of the battle. He is in serious battleground. He has butts heads daily with his kids about amount of time, trying to trick the time system into giving them more credits, trying to get onto his phones, social engineering him into situations. Like, he is so tired, he doesn't have near as much trouble with hackers as he does with his own daughters. It sounded exhausting listening to him. And I'm just kind of going, how can Joe Average, deal with that? Like, it's just not going to happen. They throw their arms up, but it's really like you can do lots of things physically. Just don't allow FaceTime on. Sorry, don't allow Facebook or social media apps onto the iPads. If the kids want access to your phone, just remember that if you have Facebook, that's for adults. You're handing them an adult device. What do they want it for? What are they going to use? Make sure they're supervised. It's like there's a lot of common sense in this stuff, and the resources. Unfortunately, everybody kind of expects the social media companies to give the resources. It's against their agenda to do that. And the government has enough trouble just policing stuff, let alone educating and putting out resources for people. It's just really they're struggling to just, like, there's thousands and thousands of rules in the driver's license, instructions, but you're driving down the road and people are left, right, and centre doing all kinds of things that are not strictly correct, because the police can only enforce so many things, and a lot of it is common sense, that they're not enforcing it because rules get all ridiculous, so society kind of in the physical world kind of has a lot of common sense built into it. But when it comes to this kind of thing, one, it's so hard to police, and two, it's not what the rules are, it's what you can police and who's going to police it and who has the resources to police it. And it's sure not going to be the social media companies, because they are most interested in getting as much interaction as possible, irrespective of their age, and so it's really a bit tough. But the other side of it too is, like, there's two sides to this sandwich. One side is how to keep kids out of adult spaces. The other side is how to stop adults from going into kids spaces. And there's not really kids spaces yet. No one's really started to do that yet. That's a problem, because a lot of the kids with special circumstances, like Asperger's, or emotional problems, or or special needs, they actually rely on social media. But Facebook is not the place for that. There could be a group in there, but the problem is you're exposing the kids to that adult environment. It's kind of like saying you have to go through the red light district to get to a preschool. But I mean, like, you're just like, sorry, that's
So well put.
a cop out. That really, you can do things for kids, but no one's providing that yet. If Facebook did that, I'd like two things, off the top of my head. One, if Apple did a kids phone that was just for kids, and it connected to YouTube, and YouTube did a just for kids video, and they do have one, right? But if the whole thing's just set up for kids, they'll have a killer application. Kids will get bored. They'll do a lot more things off the phone than not, because part of the zing of being involved with a lot of adult stuff is that they're seeing the full gamut of things that adults see. But the other thing is, no one's doing social media for kids, and especially for special interest groups. One of the first things I saw was Outback School, looking for Australia. And what a fantastic thing that they got satellite schooling for kids. It used to be ham radio for kids, and like, they never see their classmates, but they have a fantastic time. For kids that have had bad experiences, or have special or mental disabilities, all those kind of things, the internet's a fantastic thing for them. But it's kind of like, sorry, you can't. You've got to build stuff for them. You can't just turn around and say, oh, everybody on the planet can go and be exposed to everything. So everything from a 4-year-old with an iPad can see everything that an adult has the right to see. I have my own moral standards, which are quite direct and quite limited. But I don't have the right to push those on other people. It's their decision. That's what happens in democracies. But kids are a definite cutoff point. Sorry, free speech and personal rights stops with parental control, and then societally, that should be paramount importance. Like this business of just saying kids have these personal rights, but it's impinging on their free speech. I'm kind of going, nah, go and ask mum and dad, and if they'll speak for you, then good on you, fantastic. But really, the world doesn't need to hear from kids that are that can't reach the pedals of a car. you know and you're teaching them now how to boil the jug of a morning so that they don't kill themselves with scolding. Like, they're being taught. They're a gentle flower. You got to. It's part of the fun seeing them giving you grief. You I hear my daughter and my grandkids, the negotiation that goes on when she's on the phone, and I'm just thinking, that's so exhausting. I'm exhausted just hearing it, let alone being there. I'm so happy I'm not there.
I remember my father-in-law would say, when it comes to the learning lessons in our generation was more like, don't let them near the fireplace. And he'd say, don't worry, that will only happen once and never again. The same lessons don't apply when it comes to online. Sorry, Adriana, go on.
I think I want to go back to the question because Ric, he said so many valuable things right there. And it resonates a lot with what I have found. And that is that, yeah, parents are the first line of protection. They do have a level of responsibility. We can't remove that from them. And ultimately, they're the closest to their children, not the government, not anyone else, not the companies, but them, right? Having said that, though, parents are being challenged by everything that has been happening. So many of them have no idea how these technicalities work, like how a parental control is put in place. And at the same time, I feel like they've been deceived because it's so many companies, we spoke about last time with you, Barb, but so many companies will say, don't worry, we have all the security measures in place. We have all the privacy measures in place. We were taking care of it. And so many of them do trust these companies. So many think, oh yeah, or has not happened to anyone else in my street or has not happened to us before. So surely it's fine. But it definitely happens. And it's just, I think parents have a really hard time because there is a lot of information that they've been bombarded with, misinformation as well, but definitely they have a power that none of us do. And so I think that's why I am so excited to hear more about Ric's idea with SafeGen, because I think having parents in this conversation is so important and giving them as well, the opportunity to take control over. It's an absolute, I think it's just so important, and we haven't raised this before.
Now, I would absolutely now love to shift over to, I think, a topic that's the hottest topic in Australia still, which is Australia has banned under 16s from social media from December 10th. Now, it's a law. We're going to go with that. So there's a law in place for that. But here's what's happened since, according to the numbers of my research. Allegedly, 4.7 million accounts were removed almost immediately from the major platforms. That number is pretty impressive, right? 59% of Australians say it's been effective. 43% of parents noticed more in-person socializing. But, and there's always a but, this is the part that worries me. 27% of parents say that their kids just moved to a less regulated platform. And according to Q Studio's data, shows actually the usage among under the 16s has barely dropped at all. And I can vouch, I've said this before, I can vouch that I know of teenagers of that age that have definitely bypassed the rules. So, I guess in one word answer from the both of you, right, let's start with this. Is the ban working?
I'm sorry, I have to say it this way. My answer is no. And I am saying this, it's sad about it because I think, it's a great opportunity for us to really take control over it. But it seems like it's not, just because the numbers as well. Like I think it's two-thirds of children are still there. So it's like close to 70% of them still in social media. So unfortunately, it's not working at the moment. And that being said, I think there's opportunity to actually make it work. Find ways to make it work, or find other options. Find out what is not working and why, and make this work. This is a good opportunity, to make these companies accountable, responsible, and liable. That is why this law, I think, is exciting to have. I have my opinion, a personal opinion about it, about the social media ban. And I think, to be honest, we are at this point because of the lack of accountability and liability from these companies. So this was a tool, but my answer is no. Unfortunately, it's not working at the moment.
Well, I think the actual law is like, same with alcohol and drinking and smoking or whatever. You're not an adult. No. And so I think the law is good. And yes, it is as a law, it's effective, but its implementation is not working mainly because they're doing age assurance and they're not doing, looking at technological ways of just saying a binary, yes or no. This nonsense of going on and doing face scans and monitoring, tracking, looking at who you interact with, looking at your posts. Come on, you're actually asking them to do what they already want to do behind closed doors. So it's just a bit ridiculous. But to kind of like cite our situation here at SafeGen is the government did a thing called the Age Assurance Technology Trial, the AATT. Now it started 2 years ago, and there was 62 participants in that. None of them were Australian except for us at SafeGen, and we are the only ones that have a binary solution. Everybody else, like Yoti, they're all like doing AI scans, and then the fallback is having to use a driver's license, everything like that. And none of their social media companies want their customers being forced to use, government ID or anything. So they're relying on AI, and AI, while good in some situations, is kind of plus and minus 2 years from 16-year-olds. It's kind of like that's the reason why I think things aren't working. This stories of kids being able to use teddies and all this kind of thing, using alternatives to con the system. Those kind of things can be easily fixed. Like there's no such thing as a person that logs onto their Face ID with a teddy. It's technology
Apparently
is
it
doing
does.
that, like technology is solving that problem. Come on, that's nonsense. So, like I don't want to go straight into the SafeGen pitch, but there are ways to get a binary feedback on that. And the other problem that is kind of exacerbating the problem is that in doing the AATT trial, they just said to the social media companies, here's 60 solutions, 62 solutions, mix and match and do whatever. But it's up to them to go and talk to people, and then they turn around and get their stick out and says, we're going to fine you if you don't solve the problem. But the problem is to find their infringement is so subjective that there's no binary, trigger point for them. It's really what's called best efforts. And what's a best effort? That is such a, loosey-goosey term to do.
It's terrible.
We actually at SafeGen had a pivot within 3 months of the end of the trial to actually move towards a more binary solution to this whole thing, and also to involve parents, because that's the other thing is none of the solutions actually involve parents. Because one of the logical questions I had was, we're spending all this technology and all this effort trying to find the age of the kids, which is needed to be able to definitively say who can and can't go to social media. And the one person that does know this is the parents. One, group that knows this is the parents. So why don't you just make it really easy for parents to, target their kids, to sign their kids up? If the government actually turned around and said, it's by law you have to you have to tag your kids. The big issue with that is I don't want to have to identify my kids. I don't want to have them to have a card or anything like that. But if there was an easy way for me to be able to say this device is used by my kid or this phone is used by my kid, then and it was the responsibility of parents to sign their kids up or schools to sign their kids up, then you got a lot more of a binary situation. The other thing is too, like when this whole thing came up, it seemed like a way to whack social media over the knuckles too. And so this is your problem, you fix it. But they've never known people's ages. They never are really interested in whether they're kids or adults. They're just interested in whether they click on ads or not. So so it's like you're asking them to do something which they've never done, which every bone in their body is saying we don't want to do, and you're giving them more reasons to to try and fight it. For example, I had a quite a long discussion with the number 2 at DIGI, the group that actually represents the social media companies, and she's a lawyer. But she said most of these decisions are all going to be decided in courts because it'll just be whatever we come up with, and the government says that's enough, not enough, and we'll just fight it in court, which is nonsense. Like the social media companies should say, hey, by the way, parents, if you want to tag your kid's device, if you want to tag your kids, as long as we can identify you as a parent, we'll let you, go for it. And, so
Yeah.
it's not like it's an impossible
Can
thing.
I just ask there? Sorry, Rick, but I want to simplify this, right? So, because there's already a lot of parents who struggle with, when it comes to cyber and it comes to that level of protection. So what we're saying is, at the moment, my understanding is that the key platforms owned by Meta, which your Facebooks, your Instagrams and your LinkedIn professional networks, they use a technology which does, a video selfie or a government ID check through a company called Yoti, I believe is the name. Then Snapchat claims to be linking via bank accounts. TikTok has not disclosed anything. And so you're working on this platform called SafeGen. But if you could explain that like you're explaining it to a 15-year-old, how would you explain the actual technology and how it works in comparison, and why it's so important for parents to understand that?
So in trying to tie down kids, because the reason why parents struggle with trying to keep up with their kids is because kids have all this time, they have all this energy, and they become super focused, and they don't have to make a living. The most amount of work they have to do is their chores, if they get chores, or it's an option if they don't rely on it for their income from their parents. So parents are really behind the 8 ball with all that. But when you look at the mechanics of the way kids use the internet, there are a percentage that use iPads, but even them being used by accounts that have to be authenticated by a mobile phone. And if you're not asking your parents to authenticate for you, because you need to have the phone number handy to, authenticate, then you're reliant on having a phone. So kids are either using the phone to get onto the internet and onto their social media, or they're using an iPad, but it's still connected to an account that gets authenticated with the mobile phone. And that's where you get the kids. That's where you trap them, because the authentication means they have to use a phone. And the interesting thing about phones is that phones are linked to accounts that are definitively an adult. So if the account is, if the phone numbers are linked to an adult, it's easy to get these telcos to actually tell you whether that phone number is linked to an adult or not. If it's not, then you know that there's more than likely that it's either a company phone that somebody has got because company bought it for them, or it's a kid, or it's a very poor relative who's relying on you. Like, when you think about it in practice, how many people have actually got a phone number that somebody else pays for, right? And that's the trap, because there's been a system called Kamara that's been around for many years now. It started in the UK because they used it so that people could go to the counter at a bottle shop and hold out their phone and click on a QR code that just looks up the phone number and says, is this owned by a person that's, has an adult account? And the Kamara network just comes back, yes, no. It doesn't tell them the age. It doesn't tell them the birth. It just says, is an adult? Yes, no. That's all it does for this number. It doesn't send back the phone number. to the to the bottler. It's a great system, but for online, it's really easy to do if you have a service like SafeGen that actually can connect into Kamara. It acts as the relay between Kamara and the social media companies. So what happens is a kid goes, "Oh, I'm going to beat this face scanning and all that kind of stuff," but they're still using a mobile phone number. And then when they go to log in with a phone number, the social media companies just ping via what's called an API, ping our service. Our service just has a flag. It grabs the phone number, hashes the phone number, checks in our database of hags of hashes. Is this flagged as child? Yes or no? If it's not, if it's adult, then bang, it's allowed through. If it's not, a message goes back to the social media company that says, no, this is a non-adult phone number. Show the kid either go and talk to your parents, or if you're an adult, you have to prove that you're an adult, right? And so that's the first step. The second step is to get parents to connect up to SafeGen and to tag their kid's phone number as a 16 plus account. And the way they do that is simply they put their own number in first to verify that they're an adult. We might have to work out how to link them specifically to a child, but at the moment, all we're doing is saying this is an adult phone. And then you have to have physical access to the kid's number to be able to get a PIN number off the kid's number to verify that you have access to that phone. And then that kid's phone number is then registered to 16 plus. It's still registered as a child's number, but it's parental authorized. And so what happens is the social media companies, when it goes to check in the future, it just gets a flag. Is it adult, yes or no? If it's no, then is there a flag for the parental consent? And then they're not getting back any other information except a flag. They don't know who the kid is. They actually know, the only reason they know is because the kid's used a name on their account. But we don't care. That's their problem. Well, our problem is we just want to make sure that kids are flagged, you know? So it's a pretty simple thing. It's binary. There's no loosey-gooseness. There's no, guesswork. There's no collecting of credit card numbers like TikTok and Snapchat, grabbing credit card details and proving, come on, I didn't know they were doing that. That's pretty crazy. Like a lot of that is just verifying that you're a paid account, right? If you can pay for the account, then, they're verifying with that. But what does that mean? I just get my parents' credit card number. Like, I don't understand how they can, connect to a person. A mobile number is a lot harder to get around because it's a pain in the neck to authenticate against your parents, against your parents' phone, or your mate's phone. I need to get the, authentication code. The other thing, interestingly, people don't realize is that the ISP network, the Internet Service Provider network, actually does have the phone number in the connection if the ISP is a telco. So you could actually do this at the ISP level. So there's no excuse. SafeGen is the simplest way because you're pulling in all of the telcos into one location, and then you're actually getting parental consent. But the parental consent is not not an open loop, because the kids don't get access unless they go to mum or dad and they say, hey, can you let us on? And then we keep a track of the mobile number that actually authenticated the child. So if the government wanted to do a spot check and said, this person is, we know for a fact this person is 14 and the parent has let them on, then they can actually contact the parent and find out what's going on. I think parents do need to know that. There's a lot of parents with 14-year-old kids who give in to them nagging, and they may let their kids get on. But, the first sweep, which is our first priority, is to go through and get these 70% of kids that just sidetrack the whole thing, closing that gap down, like 70% down to 30 to 20, to 10%, then we'll be really going after the smart ones after that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, ultimately, I guess the biggest battle from my perspective is that, and a lot of people for that matter, is that we're going to try to make there's 25 million people in the country, right? 4 million kids is the numbers anyway. We're trying to make 25 million people suffer and get caught in the same net to protect 4 million. And it doesn't make sense, I guess, but I understand the reasons why we want to do it. But as you suggested, if you've got the system in place that can not only minimize the risk, but not expose the data, which is the biggest problem, because it's not the kids' data that's getting caught. It's our data as adults getting caught into this. We're being pulled into the same net. We're now having the issue of the digital ID, which, is the next, hot topic, I guess, going out there at the moment. And so, I love what SafeGen has done. I truly believe it's a much better solution. And I would truly hope that the government is watching and listening, and that they look at this is the type of technology that we need to work with. And, what better environment than someone who's local, who's born here, who's known for, doing software and technology.
Yeah, because I have actually done quite a bit in the digital identity space. And, so I'm a big proponent of the no phone home technology, which is where B3C, DITs and verifiable credentials. And, but, with SafeGen, the requirements said, one, that you don't want to make the 12 pay for the one that you're protecting. So you're using the 4 million track, but you're actually going after the 1.2 million that are, that trying to make sure that not just kids, but the ones above 16, if the government allows them to go onto social media, then that's the requirement, right? So that's who you're trying to, so that's 1 in 12. And, that's, you're trying not to make 12 pay for the one that we're trying to go after. And they're the ones that you really don't want to have an ID card. They're the ones that you really don't want to have copies of their photos and selfies and all that kind of stuff. So that's the reason why I thought, oh no, ring the parents in because they know. And 2, just slap that adult tag on everything. So you can, stop them from doing that. But from the technology point of view, everything's done with hashes, which is for your audience is basically it's a scrambled representation of a mobile number or anything like a name or an address or whatever. But you can't reverse engineer or unscramble that hash, that scrambled information to get the original back. All you need to do is be able to say, if somebody says, is this mobile number part of your list? If you apply the same scramble calculation to it and the scrambled data matches, then you know you have a match. So that means that in a stored state, it's not usable to anybody. In fact, we go beyond that. We put our numbers on an HSM, which is a hardware security module, which means that no one gets access to it, only the place that stores it, and they don't get access to it too because it's a one-way. The compute and everything happens on the device. It doesn't actually, it just gives you the results. Yes, there's a match. That's all you get back out. So you want the whole system being pretty dumb. And, so between the telcos telling us that a number is adult flagged and the social media companies going, is this number flagged? There's no PII, no personally identifying information. That's the technical term for it. So our approach is not introducing any need for any digital ID or anything like that. It's nice and simple, straightforward, fast. Like it should be less than a cent per check. In fact, it should get down to 0.1 of a cent to even lower, over time. But, it's pretty expensive at the moment because, most of the numbers that we've been checking are all, really small like sites. We're only just doing, none of the big guys have actually have taken up. That's a big frustration too, because I can tell you we've had hundreds of attempts of communication, and it just crickets.
Yep. I think, Ric, that we need to do a session and show people, like put my number in, whatever it is, and we can actually show people.
No, we're actually, the site actually already enables you to put your number into the database already, but we're going to make it public that people can check their own number and the kid's number so they can see it themselves, and also the APIs so that, Woolies could actually connect to the site and, check whether their customers that want alcohol or tobacco are, it's pretty logical that if they have a credit card number that, there's a good chance they're an adult, but you still should use the mobile numbers because it's so hard to fake that. I knew my parents' credit card numbers when I was 12. Like, come on, they're not that secretive around us.
Of course you did. That's where the dirt bike suddenly rocked up. Why it rocked up? Sure.
But, you can't get away when the same address that gets delivered to is the place that your parents see everything. You can't be that sneaky.
Right. When you're a kid, there's certain things you think about and there's certain things you don't think about. And that's probably one that you've made that mistake once, Ric. I'll take you on that one. So I want to ask, I want to ask so many questions, but I'll end with this. So, and I'll start with you, Adriana, but this is a question for the both of you. If I'm a parent listening to this episode and right now I'm feeling overwhelmed, they're thinking, I had no idea. And crap, I've actually made almost every one of those mistakes that you guys have just mentioned. You've built a free family technology guide, I guess, through the Innocent Souls project. And Ric, you've got SafeGen going at the moment. And, there's many environments where people can hear you talk about this. But for the adult or the parent listening right now, what's one thing they can do tonight?
I will start saying having conversations about technology, making that a priority. I explained before in your podcast, Bora, that in my website, I just create a very simple PDF that they can put in the fridge and write down the goals that they have, the values that they have in their family. Make the conversation about technology a priority at least once a week. Have that conversation to start off. And on those conversations, I think things like these that we have discussed with Ric, right? Like, why is it important for them to have certain boundaries for children not to be exposed to certain things, and to make it so that communication among their family members is the most structural way to protect them. Parents are responsible and they have been given these beautiful gems, as Ric put it. And I think that is the first thing that they need to do. Make this a priority, have the conversations. And from there, I think, a lot of information is out there, and I am so excited to see what Ric's idea is going to do, because I think there is a great impact around giving parents a chance to take control over and make the right decisions for their children. Most parents will do that. And I think it's great that we're having this conversation today, and that parents now know that there is an option out there where they're going to be the ones taking the decision for the children.
Yep. And Ric, I guess same question, but from the technology side, what's one setting that they should check, one app permission, or should they review, or a conversation they should have with their child about their digital life?
Okay. I'll probably get myself into trouble with this, but it's just about being informed what's going on. So to me, it was really important. It's really important to get onto your kids' devices and, and say, hey, I know you need to have your privacy and all of that, but if you're in a schoolyard and you're being supervised by any adult, they need to know that you're not doing untoward things on your devices. You're in this household. I don't want to go into your Facebook and all that kind of stuff, but I need to know what mobile account is your Facebook account connected to. I need to check on these things. I need to know what the account name is. Hiding this stuff from me is, making me think, what else are you hiding from? I'm your mother. I'm your dad. Come on. I'm trying to help you understand. I know you'd like to go out and drive the car and you'd like to have a motorbike. You've got an e-bike. What are you talking about? You can go nearly as fast, right? Those kids have got e-bikes now. But, I'm just saying that they'd love to have all of these responsibilities, but they don't. That's part of letting them gradually get exposed to it. Hitting somebody, like I remember the first time I killed an animal because of my driving. I was learning to drive and I hit an animal in the nearby, and I wasn't thinking clearly. It was a terrible experience. But it also, because my parents raised me right, it made me think that could have been a kid, that could have been a gentleman running around. Shut up, slow down, and really concentrate when you're driving. Because watching that little animal die was so agonizing for me. It was a terrible experience. Like, parents love their kids. They're exhausted. They've got to do a hell of a lot in their life, but there's no reason for them not to have a look at the kid's phone. If they start saying they need their privacy and hiding it from all that kind of stuff, you've got to be respectful of it, but come on. They're not adults. They're not, they haven't got individual rights. They're not going to go to the UN and get parental restrictions put on you. Actually, Westminster law, I was surprised when looking at the way Westminster law executes law involving parents, that there's a lot of delegation. It actually admits that parents are actually what's the word they use in the Westminster law? That they are like a monarchy. The king makes the rules. There's no voting involved in it. It's so arbitrary. They make arbitrary rules. So so use it. Don't be scared of it. This business. Everybody thinks that kids have all these rights and everything. No, they have a right to your protection and your affection and your love, but they don't have the right to go out there and cause damage to other people or to themselves. Yeah, sorry.
That's brilliant. You're not in trouble. I wholeheartedly agree with it. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the both of you. Thank you for the energy and the time you've put in to be here and such invaluable information that you've given the parents. So I guess what's the best way people, if they want to reach out directly, what's the best way they can reach out to you guys, Adriana?
They can go to my website, and my email is info@theinnocentsoulsproject.com.au. But if they want to leave any comments, any feedback, or if they have any questions, anything I can support with, there's a section there where it says contact me. And obviously I get that information so I can get in contact with them. I'm happy to help anyone out there that have those very difficult questions about technology and how to protect children. And so I'm here to ensure no child is unprotected, and obviously that we ensure that things that happen to me obviously don't happen to anyone else. So happy to help.
And our site is safegen.com.au. There's a SafeGen in the States, but safegen.com.au is our site. And just get in there and sign up their mobile number to see if it's an adult and sign their kids in to protect them. And then we're on LinkedIn under safegen.com.au. So, there is a SafeGen, the US version, as I said, but that's a different technology altogether. But you'll see us on LinkedIn. And actually, Adriana's going to be there quite a bit. So you don't have to deal with my tech talk. You can, talk with somebody who's real and actually, knows what she's talking about.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ric.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.